Hey there, sleepless rabble. Let me take over for a while. Tonight, we're walking into a world of marble columns, flickering oil lamps, and gods who acted like the original drama queens of history. Forget calm and holy perfection. This was divine chaos on an epic scale. Affairs, betrayals, scandals. If Olympus had a gossip column, it would have been thicker than the Iliad. We're diving into the strangest, wildest, and most absolutely bonkers stories of the Roman gods. Jupiter's creative dating strategies, Venus and Mars starring in the first reality TV scandal, Saturn turning family dinner into something unspeakable, and Bacchus throwing parties so wild the Senate had to ban fun entirely. So before we open the gates of the Pantheon, do me a tiny favor. Hit that like button if chaos sounds like your bedtime vibe, and subscribe for more darkly soothing tales. And in the comments, tell me this. Which Roman god would you trust the least with your secrets? This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you're listening to boring Roman myths for sleep. Except they're not boring at all. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the heart of Rome. Not the tourist postcards, not the polished ruins bathed in Instagram filters, but the living, breathing beast it once was. Marble and sweat, voices rising like smoke in the heat, mingling with the clatter of carts and the iron tang of blood drifting from the arena. The air thick with incense and ambition. In the shadows of towering columns, men plotted empires. And above it all, the gods watched. Or at least that's what people believed. And they believed hard. For the Romans, life wasn't life without a deal struck with the divine. Every day began and ended under the eyes of beings too powerful to ignore and too temperamental to trust. You prayed before you planted. You prayed before you marched to war. You even prayed before you sat on the toilet. Because, yes, there was a goddess for that. And if you think that sounds excessive, congratulations, you've just met Roman religion. Here's the thing. They didn't invent these gods from scratch. Rome was practical, ruthless, efficient. When it came to culture, they had no shame in borrowing what worked and stamping their name on it like an imperial seal. The Greeks gave them a pantheon rich with drama and poetry, and Rome said, nice. We'll take that. Just make it Roman. Zeus became Jupiter. Aphrodite became Venus. Ares strutted into town as Mars. Same personalities, new branding. Because even gods need a rebrand when you're going global. But Rome didn't stop there. They scaled the whole thing up like a franchise. Greeks gave them the main characters, and Rome added the supporting cast. The gods of thresholds, hinges, gardens, grain silos, dung heaps, you name it, they had a god for it. A divine LinkedIn where everyone had a job title, no matter how ridiculous. Why? Because life is chaos, and humans hate chaos. The Romans turned every crack in their fragile world into a doorway guarded by a deity. An empire of marble and prayers, micromanaged by the heavens. And if you think this sounds serene, soft white robes, gentle chanting, halos of light, you've been lied to. These gods were not serene. They were messy, loud, volatile. They fought, they drank, they schemed, they seduced. And they did it all with the kind of confidence only immortality can buy. The stories we're about to walk through weren't whispered as moral lessons. They were thundered in temples, etched in stone, and woven into festivals that turned cities inside out. Why? Because the Romans understood something deep. Drama sells, even in marble. When life is unpredictable, when plague or famine can wipe out everything, you want the comfort of knowing the chaos above looks a lot like the chaos below. Gods that are perfect? Dull? Gods that cheat, rage, and fall apart spectacularly? That's relatable content. And Rome was addicted. The divine scandals weren't just entertainment. They were lessons wrapped in silk and lightning bolts. Power is fickle, desire is dangerous, and the universe doesn't run on fairness. It runs on whims. Now picture it. The Pantheon. Not the quiet dome we stroll through today, but alive. Oil lamps flickering against walls that seem to breathe. Statues looming in shadow, their stone faces pretending to be calm while their real selves, somewhere beyond mortal sight, snarl and laugh and whisper. Priests in spotless robes glide across mosaic floors, their arms heavy with garlands. The scent of myrrh and burnt offerings coils through the air, clinging to your throat like smoke. And behind it all, the low murmur of prayers, thousands of voices trying to bargain with eternity. You can almost feel it, can't you? That tension between reverence and fear. Because these gods weren't your buddies. They didn't love you unconditionally. They didn't offer cosmic customer service when life went wrong. They were beautiful, terrible forces of nature. Ask nicely and they might help you. Cross them and they'll burn your city to ash just to make a point. And at the top of this shimmering, dangerous hierarchy sits one figure, the king, the storm in human form. His name? Jupiter, lord of the sky, wielder of thunder, guardian of law, and serial troublemaker with a shape-shifting kink. The Romans called him Optimus Maximus, the best and greatest. And in some ways, he was. He crowned emperors, decided wars, and held the keys to victory and ruin. But peel back the gold leaf, and you'll find a creature of appetite, of ego, of endless, restless hunger. Before we step up to his throne, pause for a second. Feel the floor beneath your feet, cool and solid. Hear the echo of sandals in the temple halls. Somewhere above, the crackle of a distant storm. That's not weather. It's him, stretching his fingers across the sky, already bored, already looking for the next distraction. And trust me, when Jupiter gets bored, the world pays the price. Shall we go in? Step softly now. The air here feels different. Heavier. It hums with a kind of energy that raises the tiny hairs on your arms, as if the atmosphere itself has been charged. You're standing before the king, not a king of men, but of everything. The dome above your head curves like the sky, painted in blues so deep they almost swallow the gold. And at the far end, beneath an arch draped in laurel and smoke, there he sits in stone. Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the best and greatest. The name alone was enough to make senators drop their voices to a whisper. To the Romans, Jupiter wasn't just a god. He was the axis the whole empire spun on. The sky, the storms, the roar of thunder rolling over hills. That was his language. His word wasn't law. It was lightning. And when he spoke, empires listened. Victory and defeat lay in his fist. A single nod could crown a general with triumph or crush him under shame. Every soldier marching towards some distant horizon carried Jupiter in his heart. Every oath sworn in the Senate called on him as witness. When consuls took office, their first duty was to sacrifice to Jupiter, as if to say, "Here I am, don't smite me yet." Even the laws, the sacred backbone of Roman order, were tied to his name. Break an oath, and you weren't just lying to men. You were mocking the thunder. And Rome adored pageantry almost as much as it adored power. Jupiter had the best of both. His great temple on the Capitoline Hill gleamed like the sun had married stone. Columns soared, statues of gods glittered, and in the heart of it all, a colossal Jupiter, staring down with eyes that promised everything and nothing. White oxen were led up its steps, their horns gilded, their hides wreathed in flowers. Priests in spotless togas moved like ghosts, chanting words older than empire. The smell of blood and incense curled into the air, thick and metallic, coating your tongue. And when the sacrifice was done, the omens read, and the crowds roared, Rome felt invincible. But there was something else, a tension humming under the marble and gold. Because power like this comes with a whisper. What if he notices me? Not in the way mortals long to be seen by gods in hymns and prayers. Number in the way a lion notices a deer. Because here's the truth they didn't carve into temple walls. Jupiter was not content to sit on his throne like some divine statue collecting dust. He was appetite in motion, curiosity on two legs, the sky draped over shoulders that couldn't stand boredom for long. Imagine that for a moment. The king of gods, showered in endless devotion, offerings piled like mountains, names sung in every corner of the empire. And still not enough. Still restless. Still prowling. His gaze sliding from the storms above to the warm pulse of life below. Kings, queens, shepherd girls, nymphs dancing in forests. Everyone was a spark waiting to ignite. And Jupiter? He was lightning looking for a place to strike. But we'll get there soon enough. For now, stand here with me and feel it. The way marble chills your feet. The faint taste of ash in the incense smoke. The sound of distant thunder creeping across a sky bruised purple with dusk. That's not weather. That's a god clearing his throat. And when he moves, the whole world will shake. Picture the sea. Not a postcard blue, but a living creature, its skin rippling with molten silver, under a sky that tastes of salt and sun. On the shore, a girl stands, her bare feet pressed into warm sand. Europa. Just a mortal. Just another flicker of life in a world thick with them. She laughs, tossing her hair back as the tide curls and hisses around her ankles. For a moment, she thinks the day belongs to her. It doesn't. Somewhere above, a gaze locks onto her like a hawk. Jupiter, bored again. You'd think immortality comes with hobbies, pottery, poetry, anything. But no, it comes with obsession. He sees her and decides. And when Jupiter decides, reality bends. He doesn't descend in a blaze of glory, too obvious, too honest. No, he slips into disguise, weaving power into flesh and bone, until where there was nothing stands a bull. Not a snorting, mud-crusted beast, but a vision in ivory and silk. His hide gleams like moonlight poured over muscle, his eyes dark pools reflecting things they shouldn't. The kind of bull you'd never eat, not even if you were starving. The kind you'd trust for reasons you couldn't name. Europa sees him and smiles. Because in myth, people have a dangerous habit of saying yes to the wrong things. She runs her fingers down his neck, laughs when he kneels like an invitation. And then she climbs on. Of course she does. Because in these stories, curiosity isn't a quirk. It's a death sentence. The bull rises, hooves churn the sand. Then, in one liquid motion, he charges, not inland, but out, into the surf, into the yawning blue. Water foams against his flanks, sprays her skin with salt. Europa screams, clinging to the horns, her hair a banner streaming behind. The shore shrinks. The horizon swallows everything. And in that endless stretch between land and sky, the bull laughs. Or maybe it's thunder. Either way, by the time she realizes what he is, it's far too late. On some hidden shore, draped in flowers and shadows, the bull becomes a man again. A god with eyes like storms breaking over mountains. Europa doesn't come home. Some poets call it romance. Personally, I call it what it was. The world's first kidnapping by livestock. And yet, if you thought that was Jupiter's strangest trick, think again, because a ball was just the opening act. Next, he decided feathers might be fun. The sea salt taste fades from the air, replaced by something softer, heavier, the breath of summer over still water. The world tilts inland now, into a hush, stitched with green. Cicadas sing like tiny metal strings plucked under a molten sky, and beyond the trees, a lake waits, flat as glass. A mirror laid on the earth, swallowing clouds whole, holding the sun like a coin at its heart. At the water's edge, she kneels. Leader. The name hums like silk across the lips. Draped in linen that clings where the heat has kissed it damp. She bends low, her fingers skimming the surface. Ripples bloom and fade, carrying fragments of sky into shadows. For a moment, just a moment, she thinks this silence belongs to her. It doesn't. From somewhere above, the light fractures. A flicker, then a flare. White, too white, tearing across the blue like a shard of broken frost. Wings carve the air with a hollow thrum, slow and heavy as a heartbeat you can hear in your teeth. And then, impact. A sound like silk ripping, then water exploding into silver shards. Rings swell, scatter, collapse. And in their center, he rises. The swan, but not the kind that hisses behind hedges in manicured gardens. Not the pompous pond tyrant that children feed crumbs to. This is a creature polished beyond reason, a dream wearing feathers. Every quill drinks sunlight until it glows, each curve honed like a blade disguised as grace. Droplets slide down its back like strings of molten glass, its eyes black as starless midnight, deep enough to bury secrets in and never find them again. Leda freezes, because that's how it begins. The pause, the stillness, the fatal second where awe slips its arm through yours and leads you blind into the dark. She doesn't move as the swan glides closer, drawing a pale question mark across the surface of the lake. Closer, closer, until the hem of her gown drinks the shallows and clings like spilled wine. The bird bows its head, a gesture stolen from humility and repainted as seduction. She laughs softly, because what else do you do when a thing so unreal bends to you? Her hand rises, trembles, then lands. Warmth, shockingly warm, as though breath has been folded into silk and sealed under her skin. She expects softness and finds something alive, something humming with a pulse older than mountains. The swan exhales, or laughs, low and hollow, and the sound slides down her spine like oil. And then the world closes, light thickens, shadows stretch, bending like iron bars. Wings fold, not gently, but like doors slamming shut on air that suddenly tastes too thin. White walls lean in, smelling of rain and iron and something sweeter. A perfume of rot wrapped in roses. She should move, should scream. But myths are written in a language where choice never translates. The poets will varnish this in gold. They'll call it union, drape it in garlands, crown it with marble. But the truth is simpler, sharper. Power dressed as beauty. A god who wanted. A world that never taught him the word no. Later, there will be eggs. Yes, eggs. Smooth, pale shells splitting like whispers, spilling futures no one asked for. And from one will come a girl sharpened into legend. Helen. A spark disguised as flesh, destined to turn cities into pyres, to drag nations into a firestorm that will howl for 10 long years. All because a restless god decided wings might be fun. And if you think the story ends here, you haven't been paying attention. Because boredom is a void, and Jupiter was born to fill it. Bulls, birds, what next? When flesh won't open doors, When wings aren't enough, maybe wealth will. Not in coins, but in something stranger. Something golden that slips through cracks like sunlight breaking into dust. And that brings us to a locked room, and a girl named Danae. The lake fades behind us, the white feathers melting into memory like frost into flame. Now the air grows colder, denser, pressed into the stone ribs of a chamber where sunlight has never set foot. Imagine walls so tight they seem carved from night itself, thick, unyielding, pulsing faintly with the stale breath of old fears. This is where they put her. Danae. A name meant to shimmer, locked in darkness because of a prophecy sharp enough to bleed an empire. Her father heard it first, from lips slick with oracle smoke. Your daughter will bear a son who kills you. And fathers in myths are nothing if not dramatic. His solution? Walls. Iron bars. A prison dressed as protection. Picture her now, sitting on a bed narrow as a coffin lid, linen pooling like tired snow. Her fingers drift over the cold stones, tracing cracks that spider like veins. No doors, no windows, just a slit where air squeezes through like a dying thing. She dreams of things she's never touched. The sting of salt wind, the riot of leaves when the world laughs in green. She dreams because what else is there? When you've been reduced to a voice echoing in your own skull. But the world has a way of breaking locks, especially when gods grow restless. It begins as a shimmer. At first, she thinks her eyes are lying, weaving tricks from hunger and heat. Dust motes drifting, glowing faintly in the gloom. Then brighter, thicker, spilling down like threads, pulled from a sunbeam. A hush coils through the air, heavy, sweet, charged. She rises, heart a drum in a room too small to hold its echo. And then it happens. The ceiling splits in a slow smile and light pours through. Not white, not silver, but molten. Gold. Rivers of it. Sheets, spears, arrows, molten ropes that writhe and twist and fall. It splashes over stone, over her hair, her skin, cloaking her in a storm that doesn't burn, only blinds. Each droplet hums like a secret. Each thread curls around her like hands made of sunlight. Danae gasps. The air smells of metal and honey, of wealth made flesh. And somewhere in that golden downpour, a voice slides low against her ear. A sound so deep it feels like the floor vibrating under her bones. No thunder this time, no wings, just the quiet arrogance of inevitability. The poets will call this a blessing, because they always do. They'll paint it in verses dripping with velvet and moonlight, pretend consent blooms in the cracks like lilies. But you and I? We know better. This wasn't love. This was gravity wearing gold. Later, when the storm gutters out and silence sweeps the floor clean, Danae will curl her hands around something smaller than a fist. Something warm, alive. A child. Perseus. The boy destined to slice through monsters, to sever fate with a blade as bright as vengeance. And the father who built these walls to cheat prophecy, he'll die anyway. That's the punchline of myth. You can't outbar the bars destiny sets for you. And Jupiter? He moves on. Always does. His appetite is a tide that never ebbs, flooding new shores, drowning new names. But here's the thing about tides. They leave wreckage. Broken bodies, shattered vows. And in this case, something sharper. Rage. Because every storm casts a shadow, and his shadow had a name. Juno, queen, wife, the patience of marble, cracked and splintering under the weight of one betrayal, too many. She loved him once, if love is what you call the ache of wanting a god who belongs to no one. But now her love is a blade, and she knows exactly where to cut. And Jupiter, he moved on. Always did. His appetite was a tide that never ebbed, rolling from one shore to the next. Bulls, birds, gold, each tricked louder than the last, each ending in ashes for someone else. But tides leave wreckage, broken vows, scattered lives, and sometimes something sharper. A shadow swelling behind him, heavy with silence, polished to a blade, because every storm casts one. And this storm's shadow had a name: Juno. Queen, wife, patience stretched so thin it sang. They called her goddess of marriage, of women, of birth. But no hymn ever told you this. When Juno loved, she clung like iron, and when iron bends, it breaks. So, come closer. We're stepping out of Jupiter's sunlight now, into the marble dark halls where rage breathes under silk. Because if you thought his games were dangerous, wait until you see what she does with the pieces. The first thing you feel is weight. Not thunder this time. That's Jupiter's signature flourish. But something quieter, heavier, like a crown pressing into your skull. The air cools. Shadows lengthen across polished stone, their edges sharp enough to cut. And then she appears. Not in a blaze, not in a storm. She doesn't need drama to announce herself. Juno moves like inevitability, slow, silent, silk slicing over marble. She is beauty, yes, but not the kind you cradle. Juno is a cathedral. All pillars and vaulting arches, all solemn music wrapped in light you're too afraid to touch. Her face could grace coins, her eyes could freeze armies mid-step. But the real terror? The stillness. The way she holds it like a knife behind her back. The Romans sang her name with honeyed tongues. They built her temples vast as empires, draped them in flowers, drowned her altars in wine. Every bride, trembling under her veil, whispered for Juno's favor, because love without her blessing was a house built on sand. Her month, June, was theirs, glowing with vows and feasts. Even childbirth bent its knees to her power. No infant's first cry dared pierce the air without a shadow lingering close. But hymns are liars. They never told you what fear hid in the folds of those garlands. Because if Juno smiled, the world softened. If she frowned, cities burned. She was the hinge on which fortune swung. And gods help you if the hinge rusted. And it did. Oh, it did. You see, Juno didn't marry a man. She married a weather system in human skin. Jupiter's hunger was the stuff of songs and scandals. His gaze roamed like wildfire, scorching anything that bloomed in its path. And while the poets dressed it in metaphors of passion, they all skimmed the truth. Every affair was a splinter driven under her nail. 1, tolerable. 2, forgivable. But after the 3rd, the 4th, the 50th, love curdled into something darker. Here's what makes Juno terrifying. She didn't howl. She didn't hurl lightning. She sharpened her silence into a blade and learned how to cut without spilling her dignity. Take Callisto, sweet, foolish Callisto, a nymph with eyes full of moonlight, sworn to chastity under Diana's silver bow. She thought vows could shield her. She thought wrong. Jupiter found her, wearing trickery like a second skin, and left her with shame swelling in her belly. When Juno saw, did she scorch Jupiter where he stood? Number. She twisted the knife where it hurt more. She turned Callisto into a bear. Flesh ripped, bones screamed. Fingers warped into claws that carved through her own reflection in the black glass of forest pools. Later, Jupiter flung her into the heavens as a consolation prize, Ursa Major, a crown of stars to hide the dirt under his nails. Juno let him. Revenge is sweeter when it stains the innocent. Then there was Semele. Mortal. Lovely. Stupid in that way only mortals can be when gods croon in their ears. Juno came to her cloaked in kindness, her voice soft as milk, dripping doubt like venom. If he truly loves you, make him show himself, Semele asked. Jupiter, ego blazing, obliged. And when his divinity split his skin, when fire screamed from every pore, Semele's beauty charred to bone in the space of a heartbeat. They buried her in whispers. Jupiter rescued the child from her ash-scattered ribs. But Juno watched the smoke and smiled like a door swinging shut. And then, Hercules, the son everyone sang of, the hero destined to heave the world on his back. Born of another bed Jupiter couldn't resist. Juno didn't wait for him to grow. She sent snakes to his cradle, green coils dripping death, tongues tasting infant breath. He strangled them, tiny fists crushing their throats, and the poets hailed it as triumph. But listen closely. It was a message, carved deep in the marrow of fate. You will fight me until your bones rot, and even then, I will not let you rest. Pattern spotted yet? Juno didn't scorch skies. She salted the earth. Every lover, every child bore the weight of her crown. And while the world gossiped, while mortals wagged their tongues about a jealous wife, they forgot the truth. Jealousy is hunger starved too long, and hunger always eats. So here she stands now in the Pantheon's hush, her silence crackling like frost underfoot. Jupiter's name drips from the lips of priests in some perfumed corner, his laughter tangling in another woman's hair. And Juno? She waits. Queens don't rush. Queens sharpen their knives and let time do the bleeding. But while she broods in marble shadows, coiling her wrath like smoke, the air elsewhere begins to thicken with a different scent. Not iron, not storm, something sweeter. Perfume smothered in heat, honey steeped in sin. Because if Juno was winter, another goddess was summer set on fire. Venus. And when Venus moved, entire worlds forgot their balance. Venus never entered a room. Rooms entered her. They reshaped themselves around her like desperate lovers, corners bowing inward, light bending to kiss her shoulders. To speak of her beauty is to admit failure, because language crawls where she soared. She wasn't the sun. She was the shimmer that tricks your eyes into chasing heat on the horizon. She didn't burn. She smoldered. Slow. Patient. Enough to make a man rip out his own compass and follow. The Romans didn't just worship her. They institutionalized her. Venus wasn't tucked away in shadowy shrines. She was empire. Flesh draped over ambition like silk stretched tight on a blade. Her name throbbed in the vows of lovers, in the cracks of battle prayers, in the honeyed rot of senate deals. Coins bore her face, bloodlines clung to her like ivy. Julius Caesar traced his root to her breast and called it legitimacy. Because what's power if it doesn't wear perfume? Her temples steamed with incense, thick as lust, curling up columns white as thigh bones. Garlands drooped like exhausted courtesans. Wine pooled on the marble like dark mirrors, sugared and spiced until the air tasted like heat. People didn't pray to Venus. They confessed. Whispered into the stone, "Make me wanted. Make me worshipped. Make me ruin someone who deserves it." And she gave when it pleased her. Desire was her kingdom, and kingdoms are only fun when someone's bleeding for the crown. But power has a pulse, and boredom stops its heart faster than daggers. Venus, drowning in hymns and honey, wanted something raw. Something that didn't kneel. Something that bit back. Mars, If Venus was silk, Mars was steel hammered red. Not cold steel, no. Steel drunk on fire, still spitting sparks when it hits the world. Rome's darling butcher, patron of every soldier who ever kissed a blade and begged, "Make me brutal enough to live." Picture him. Bronze plates kissing sun, his body an anatomy lesson in violence, his mouth curled like the lip of a blade, promising nothing tender. He smelled of smoke and iron, and that coppery edge that clings to your tongue after you bite it. Where Venus bent the world with a sigh, Mars broke it over his knee. They met in a silence thick with prophecy. Not in hymns or rituals, those were for mortals fumbling under altars. This was a glance sharpened until it drew blood. A word stretched slow enough to snap. Laughter curdled in the dark like spilt wine, and then shadows swallowed the rest. They didn't fall, they collided. Flint and steel, spark and tinder. A chemistry so reckless the stars leaned closer just to watch. Olympus has halls, yes, but theirs became a battlefield dressed in linens, groaning under the weight of their hunger. Pillows split. Lamps died choking on their own smoke. They didn't make love. They made arson. But here's the thing about fire. It casts light, and light spills under doors. Secrets, no matter how sweet, have teeth. Vulcanus tasted them first. Husband. Smith. The god who chained storms with his hands, who beat mountains until they wept molten tears. He didn't shout, didn't curse. Fury was for creatures with smaller throats. Vulcanus simply walked back into his forge, into the red that birthed every blade heaven ever swung, and spoke to the fire in a tongue older than vows. He made a net. Bronze spun so fine it vanished in the dark, yet strong enough to hogtie a hurricane. Each link sang as he shaped it, a hymn with no mercy in the chorus. It smelled of blood and oil and something sharper. The satisfaction of craft tilted toward cruelty. When it was ready, he smiled. Or maybe that was just the fire grinning in his eyes. They fell for it, of course. How could they not? Lovers blinded by their own heat, sliding under sheets fat with perfume, fingers painting bruises in places the poets never write about. The net hissed as it dropped. A whisper fattened into a snarl. Chains slithered, kissed, locked. The doors exploded inward, and Olympus came running. Gods hungry for spectacle, tripping over their own laughter. Jupiter roaring until his ribs rattled. Apollo smirking like he'd write the ballad and sell it by dawn. Mercury, already scripting captions for eternity. When Bay says, "Come over," but hubby has receipts. Imagine it. Two bodies lacquered in sweat and shame, tangled in a trap that glittered like venom, their beauty bruised into farce. Vulcanus didn't speak, didn't need to. The silence roared louder than their mockery. The poets, desperate cowards, called it comedy. But this wasn't a joke. It was a live stream before hashtags were even sparks in language. Instagram without an exit button. A comment section carved in bronze. Every like eternal. Every humiliation fossilized in laughter. Later Vulcanus loosed them. The chains melted back to whispers. The crowd slunk off to their altars, dragging chuckles like bloodied trophies. But scandals don't die. They ferment. Sweet at first, then sour, then sharp enough to peel skin. And this one bubbled thick in Olympus's veins long after the wine dried. Venus? She draped herself back in silk and smiled like the knife you don't see coming. Mars? He strapped his bronze and strode back to war, because some hungers never leave the mouth. But while laughter still smeared the walls, while whispers scuttled like rats through the marble, something older stirred. No perfume, no petals, just a stench of iron and ash crawling up from the pit where time hides its teeth. Saturn, a god who didn't seduce, didn't flirt, didn't beg. He swallowed, whole. And the first thing he swallowed was mercy. The Romans sang him golden once. The god who ruled before law had bones, before crowns learned the weight of blood. He was time's fist and fortune's breath, father of plenty, keeper of cycles that fed the earth until its belly split with grain. They whispered of his age as the age when men walked unclothed, unchained, unscarred by greed. No kings, no chains, just soil fat with promise and skies heavy with wine. The golden era, they called it, as if smearing enough honey on the tongue could hide the iron aftertaste. 'Cause nothing gold stays. Ask Saturn. He knew it before poets carved it into lines. He held abundance like a lover, but in the dark corners of his skull, the prophecy squatted, it ugly, patient, grinning through its rotted teeth. One of your children will kill you. And here's the thing about fear. It doesn't whisper. It howls. It digs its nails in and pulls until reason bleeds out. Saturn, king, titan, spine of the world, buckled. The god who cradled seasons in his palm began to chew on his own seed. First child, born screaming, fists like pink pearls. He opened his mouth, no lullaby, no blessing, just teeth. The crunch louder than the cry, milk curdled into blood, soft bones collapsing between molars ground by eternity. Another child, another gulp. Their names erased in a throat that swallowed them like secrets, slick and blind. One by one, warm bundles slid into the black tide of his gut, their futures dissolving like sugar under a storm. And the world watched. Silent forests bowing deeper, rivers biting their tongues until they turned to stone. Even the sun leaned back, smearing its hands in gold as if innocence were a stain it could scrub. Ops watched too. Ops, queen and mother. The ghost of warmth dragging chains through a palace that stank of meat and fear. When her last child came wailing into her arms, she hid the tremor in her hands. She smiled. She kissed the brow slick with stars. And she lied. She wrapped a stone in swaddling bands, fattened it with rags until it mimicked breath. She held it like hope in the half-light, then laid it in Saturn's waiting jaws. He swallowed without looking, drunk on dread, blind to the rattle echoing in his gut like laughter. The child lived, hidden in a cave, nursed on shadow and the milk of a goat whose name you'd never care to speak. He grew bones from silence, teeth from frost, and a spine tempered in the knowledge that someday he'd crack the sky open like a chest and crawl out wearing his father's crown. You know his name already, Jupiter. And when the prophecy flowered, when the hidden child rose with his fist full of storms, the world tore. Oceans spat their guts onto land. Mountains ripped their roots like teeth from the black gums of the earth. Titan against sun. Time against tomorrow. The clash roared through eternity until the old king fell, choking on his own dark tide. Saturn tumbled into chains that smelled of brimstone, his howl shredding the sky as they dragged him down, down where light goes to rot. The Romans never forgot. Fear leaves fossils. They built him temples anyway, because worship is the coin you pay to keep old nightmares quiet. They fed him offerings slick with oil and blood, praying his shadow would stay chained. And in December, when the sun bled weak and the nights came fat and hungry, they cut loose in his honor. Saturnalia, they called it. A carnival of chaos wrapped in wreaths. Slaves dined like kings. Kings wore collars of jesters. Dice rattled like teeth on every table. They called it joy, but listen close and you'll hear the ghost of a scream in the laughter. A whisper saying, "Remember what sleeps beneath your feet." And yet, even chains can rust. Even hunger can hum like wine in the dark. Because after Saturn, the world reeled toward a different madness. One dripping with grapes, swollen with laughter that stank of sweat and sin. If Saturn was famine, Bacchus was feast. And the first thing he uncorked was restraint. Where one gnawed bone in silence, the other painted the sky in wine and called it holy. The darkness hadn't even cooled from Saturn's fall, when a new fire sparked. A fire that smelled of crushed grapes and sweat, that hummed with drums fat on hide and hearts. And in its heat, the world learned a new gospel. Pleasure is prophecy, and the only sin is standing still. Bacchus didn't arrive like a king. He seeped in, slow as a stain spreading through silk. A god in ivy and leopard skins, hair tangled with vines, lips purpled with the ghosts of 1,000 vineyards. His feet were bare, his smile was lawless, and his eyes, oh, those eyes, held the hush before lightning, and the hush after climax, braided into one endless burning thread. To the Romans, he was many things: god of wine, patron of ecstasy, breaker of boundaries. But under the golden incense the truth simmered. Bacchus wasn't a god you worshipped. He was a god you survived. His rites began as whispers, tucked behind temple doors, then spilled into valleys thick with night. Imagine it. Forest trembling under drums that beat like ribs cracking open. The air thick with resin and rot-sweet perfume. Torches licking the dark into tongues of orange. Women, maids, matrons, mothers, throwing back their heads until their throats were black tunnels gulping stars. Veils shredded into rags. Flesh slick with wine and sweat. They didn't dance. They convulsed. Bodies folding and breaking like waves, drunk on their own violence. And the men? Some came to chase pleasure. Others came to be chased. None left whole. Because Bacchus didn't offer consent. He dissolved it. His gospel was surrender. To wine, to want. To the screaming hush where thought dies and the animal stands crowned in your skull. The Bacchanalia, they called it. Festivals that made Saturnalia look like a Sunday nap. One night became 3, became 10, became a season ripped from the calendar's spine. Dice clattered like teeth, cups overflowed, and somewhere in the thicket, someone tore someone else open in the name of liberation. They called it ecstasy. Rome called it treason when it remembered how to breathe. Because here's the thing. Chaos is cute until it votes. Until its hymns swell into riots. Until its feasts ferment into factions that rot the pillars of the state. The Senate tried to strangle the cult, choking it with laws and lashes. Edicts carved like screams into marble. No rites without license, no orgies without oversight. But lust laughs at legislation. By the time the ink dried, Bacchus had already spilled into every crack of the empire, singing in the mouths of slaves and senators alike. And if you think this sounds like history painted in too much wine, tilt your head at the modern world. Bacchus was the prototype, the influencer who sold you freedom bottled in glass, the festival headliner whose set never ends, the algorithm that whispers, consume, consume more. And when you choke, call it choice. Burning Man, Coachella, Ibiza, every rave, every cult in a rented villa. They all sip from his vintage. The hashtags are new. The hunger is not. Because Bacchus didn't just pour wine. He poured permission. He slashed the leash from the human throat and said, run. And run they did. Into forests. into blood, into that shrieking hush where the body blooms into something you can't name without tasting copper on your tongue. And when the torches guttered, when dawn peeled its grey eyelid over the carnage, what was left? Bruises fat with fingerprints, dirt braided into hair, and a silence that wasn't peace, but aftermath. Bacchus smiled through it all, because gods don't need worship to survive. They need repetition. Every sip, every gasp, every broken vow. That's the altar. That's the hymn. But even ecstasy has an edge, and excess can only burn for so long before it collapses into its own ash. When the drums stuttered, when the vines sagged under their own weight, Rome crawled back to its gods of order, begging for hinges, thresholds, gates, anything to keep the dark out for a while. And those gates, they belong to him. Janus, the god with two faces and one truth. Everything ends, and everything begins. If Bacchus was the god who tore doors off their hinges, then Janus was the one who built the hinges in the first place. While the last echo of drums bled into silence and the ivy-blackened torches coughed out their smoke, the world crawled back to something it had almost forgotten: the hunger for order. After the feast, the famine. After the frenzy, the threshold. And at that threshold waited Janus, the god with two faces and one truth. Everything ends. Everything begins. Always at the same time. Picture him, if you can. It's harder than Venus, harder than Mars, because beauty and blood are easy for the mind to drape across a face. But Janus was a hinge dressed in divinity, a geometry of opposites braided into flesh. One face smiled at sunrise, the other at dusk. One watched what came before, the other what came after. He wasn't storm or silk or wine. He was pause, the breath caught between in and out, the hush before the door clicks shut. To the Romans, he was more than a god. He was infrastructure, not sexy, not glamorous, necessary. Janus crowned the calendar, his month, Januarius, slicing the year open like a blade dipped in frost. Every beginning bent its knee to him. Every oath cracked under his stare. Gates, doors, arches, they all sang his name in their hinges. Soldiers saluted him before the first spear fell. Lovers kissed under his breath before vows bled into rings. Janus didn't promise victory or passion. He promised passage, which, when you peel the silk off the world, is all anyone ever wants. And yet, this is Rome. For every titan that shook Olympus, for every god that wore storms like cloaks, there were others. Small gods. Strange gods. Gods that sound like a joke until you realize someone once carved their names in stone with a trembling hand and thought, yes, this will save me. Cloacina, goddess of the sewer. Let that sink in. While Jupiter tossed lightning like confetti and Venus melted spines for fun, Cloacina reigned over filth. They built her an altar above the main drain of Rome, the Cloaca Maxima, because when your empire is a beast fattened on marble and meat, the real power is whoever keeps it from choking on its own shit. Then there was Cardia, Lady of Hinges. Not doors, mind you, the hinges. Her blessings kept them swinging true. Offend her, and maybe your door jams, and maybe thieves slip in like shadows fat on wine, and maybe you die. That's the logic of fear. Make a goddess out of anything that can break you. And Rubigus, sweet Rubigus, god of mildew, his feast day? April 25th, when farmers begged him not to rot their crops. They sacrificed dogs in his honor, because what else do you bribe a fungus with? If not blood? Rome was a poem written in iron, but scratch the marble, and you'll find mold whispering in the cracks. The list sprawls like ivy. Gods of hinges and harbours, gods of thresholds and dung, guardians of drains and grain silos. Rome ran on war, wine and wonder. But under the gold skin pulsed this raw nerve of superstition. Because when you live in a world where mountains shrug and seas spit up storms for sport, you make bargains with everything that breathes, or might. And that, maybe, is the most Roman thing of all. Not the conquest, not the roads, not the crowns, the bargaining. The endless sweaty hustle to keep the dark at bay with garlands and blood and whispered names carved into walls. Gods weren't ideas to them. They were the scaffolding of reality, crooked, creaking, spattered with rust. But without it, everything collapses. So the next time you pass under a doorway, pause, not for luck, not for faith, just to feel it. The hinge turning, the breath holding, that pulse of ancient panic saying, make an offering, just in case. Because Saturn may be chained, but chains rust, and Bacchus never sleeps. And somewhere in a shadow slick with ivy or a sewer fat with secrets, a god you don't believe in is still mouthing your name. And that's it. Sleepless rabble. Rome's divine soap opera. Bloody, golden, dripping with scandal. Gods who swallowed their own children. Queens with knives under their crowns. Love affairs tangled in bronze nets. And parties that made Burning Man look like a church picnic. And somehow, they still called it civilization. If you enjoyed wandering through this marble madhouse, tap that like button. Go on, it's not like Jupiter's watching. Or is he? Subscribe for more bedtime betrayals, and tell me this in the comments. If you had to pick one Roman god to ruin your life in style, who would it be? This is Napmax Sleep Stories, and you've just been listening to boring Roman chaos for sleep. Sweet dreams, if Janus lets you out the door.